Chapter 2 of Egypt under the Pharaohs by Heinrich Brugsch-Bey. Dynasties 1 through 4. And we already went over the table of the kings. The pharaohs of the first 3 dynasties. Wait, didn't they say 1 through 4? In Upper Egypt, west of the river, stood a small town called Tene, a name which the Greeks converted into This or Themis. It was the ancient metropolis of the 8th nome, and lying near to Abydos, it formed only a separate quarter of that celebrated city. It chose for its tutelary deity the warlike Anhur, while at Abydos Osiris was worshipped. Both cities have now vanished, but their memory is preserved by the necropolis and the splendid sanctuaries which the pious faith of the Egyptians raised on the border of the desert at the place which the modern inhabitants of the country call by the Arabic name of Harabat el-Madfuneh, Harabat the sunken, Tene, which in the Roman times enjoyed a certain repute for its purple dyes, must anciently have been held in special honor by the inhabitants of the land, for under the sovereigns of the 19th dynasty, the highest servants of the state of the pharaoh's own race were denoted by the title of king's son of Tene, a distinction which elsewhere occurs only in the titles of king's son of Cush, or in the land of the Ethiopians, and king's son of Heneb, that is, the city of the moon, Isle Ith Apalas. Is it Ili the Apalis? The high fame of this town rested, beyond doubt, on the received tradition that had been the cradle of the first Egyptian king and the hereditary seat of his successor for 2 dynasties. The name of this first sovereign of ancient Egypt was Mene, the Steadfast. Mene, as you see the cartouche there. Oh, I guess you don't see it. Okay, there. Our only knowledge of him is confined to a few statements of doubtful credit found in classical writings. He is said to have been the first lawgiver of Egypt, but to have corrupted the simple manners of the olden time, in that he replaced the frugal mode of life by royal pomp and sumptuous expense. To him also is ascribed the foundation of Memphis, the splendid capital of the old empire, after he had first diverted the Nile in order to gain a wide space for building the new city. By the construction of an enormous dike, the previous course of the river along the Libyan hills was cut off, and the bed thus left empty was forever filled up. Lenant Bey, one of the most active improvers of modern Egypt, is convinced that the great dike of Kuchaicha is in all probability the same in which Mene caused to be constructed 6,000 years ago. The Egyptians, like other nations of antiquity, began the work of founding a city by building the temple, which formed the center of the future town. New sanctuaries erected later occasioned the building of the new quarters which surrounded the oldest temple, and finally formed it with a single great city. The names given to the several temples embraced likewise the dwelling places of the inhabitants which adjoined and belonged to it, and thus is explained the fact that the monuments mention the same town under the most different designations. The chief name of Mena's city was also that of the nome, Enbuhat, or the White Wall. In general, it bore the title Man-Nefer, the good place, which the Greeks altered to Memphis, the Copts to Memphis, and the cuneiform inscriptions render Mempe. The last trace of the old name is preserved in Tel el Month, the modern designation of a heap of ruins close to the former royal residence of the first pharaohs. More rarely, it was called Ka-Nefer, a good appearance, or Makata, the land of the scales, and frequently by the sacred appellation of Ha-Ka-Ptah, house of worship of Ptah, who often bears the additional title of Seker or Sekare, traces of which seem to have been preserved in the name of the modern village Saqqara, near the ancient city of Memphis, the wife of who they consider to be a god, a lion-headed entity considered to be a goddess, adorned with a sun's disk, bore the name of Sekhet, or Sext, whose son, Nefer Atmu, or Yamhatep, was the Asclepios of ancient Egyptian mythology. Now, Sekhet Ma'at Lodge is the name of the OTO lodge that I attended after having a vision of a book, well, of visions that went into a book, Nadet Atwa, but that's something. All that now remains of this celebrated city consists of heaps of overthrown and shattered columns, altars, and sepulchres, which once belonged to the temples of Memphis, and of a far extended line of mounds of debris. The temple of Ptah lay on the south side of the salt-encrusted plain which stretches between Swine's Hill, Kum el Khanzir on the east, and the little Arab village of El Qasaria, of Al Qasari. They're not showing Arabic, so that's my guess here. On the west, its length lies from north to south, and the mighty statue of Ramses II shows where the splendid gate of the temple once stood. The former existence of the sacred lake to the north is proved by the inscription upon the statue. In the immediate neighborhood of the village of Al-Qasari, which means washpot, are shown the broken remains and columns of the temple, the inscriptions on which declare Ramses II to be its founder and builder. The chief axis was from east to west, and it was built of polished blocks of granite and alabaster in honor of the divine Ptah. I forget what Ptah means, but judging from the writings of Abdel Latif, an Arab physician of the 13th century of the Common Era, it would seem that in the Middle Ages, the remains of the once great city of Memphis were still so well preserved that their materials and the perfection of their workmanship excited the admiration of Arab visitors. The repeated excavations which have been undertaken in our day on the site of Memphis have given results hardly worth naming, for the immense masses of stone used in the building of the temples have been in the course of time transported to Cairo to supply the materials needed for the mosques, palaces, and houses in the city of the caliphs. The high priests of Ptah appear to have distinguished themselves by their authority and influence, and even princes of the blood royal did not find it beneath their dignity to hold that office at Memphis. For example, Kamuas, the favorite son of Ramses II, who died early and gave many gifts to the entities of the temple and fulfilled the rules of the divine service. It was not until the decline and fall of the kingdom that, and until Memphis and Thebes caused to be the famous residences of the pharaohs, that the authority of the high priest came gradually to an end. Along the margin of the desert, extending from Abu Roash as far as Maidum, lay the necropolis of Memphis, where were buried the contemporaries of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th dynasties. Their memories have been kept alive by pictures and writings on the walls of the sacrificial chambers built over their tombs in that obscure age when the symmetrical building of the pyramids and the well-executed design of the sepulchral chambers demanded skill and intelligence. The office of the architect was the occupation of the noblest men at court, many of whom were either sons or grandsons of the king. Great dignity also belonged to the nobleman who was honored with the office of a prophet of the Pyramid of Pharaoh. His duty was to praise the memory of the deceased king and devote the godlike image of the sovereign to enduring remembrance. The honor of the office was mentioned in the prophet's own tomb and was associated with the name of his deified king. The Memphite tombs tell much concerning the customs of Pharaoh and his court. The sovereign bears the official title of king of the upper and lower country. He is also called per oh per or is it per the great house, better known perhaps under the Hebrew equivalent of Pharaoh. The people honored him as Lord Neb and God Netur, which isn't quite the same thing as saying a god, but people consider different things to be gods. So I understand where that comes from. At sight of him, every native prostrated himself and touched the ground with his nose, and it was an especial favor if the command of his lord permitted him only to kiss his knee. He was spoken of as His Majesty. And briefly, but not less respectfully, by a word equivalent to the German man. At the court of Pharaoh, with regard to attendance on the sovereign, order, rank, and time were exactly defined, as well for nobles of the purest descent as for the mass of busy servants. Not only did the splendor of his burial secure for the nobleman dignity and authority in the eyes of the people, but far greater weight was given to the prudent wisdom, noble culture, and the brightness of virtue. Good service was rewarded with honors and gifts. The nobleman receiving such titles as hereditary highness, Erpa, or intimate friend, Smerwat. Smurwat sounds closer, right? Erpa. The management and service of the court, as well as the administration of the country, was conducted under Pharaoh's direction by the governor and bailiff and a countless host of scribes, while the duties of personal attendance upon the king were performed by inferior officials controlled by the high steward. The boy, distinguished by early intelligence and who gave good promise for the future, was associated with the king's children as their companion in play and lessons, while a guard of noble family superintended the house of the king's children, on whom devolved heavy responsibility for the bodily health, for the education and discipline of the royal children. The queen and other ladies of the royal family were for the most part honored with the sacred dignity of prophetess of Hathor and Nut. They lived in the women's houses, guarded by free men, chosen by the king, and was permitted to the princesses to ally themselves in marriage with some of the great nobles. The duty of attending to the buildings and all kinds of work in stone belonged to skilled persons of the noble class. In the caverns of the mountains of Tura, opposite to Memphis, they quarried limestone for building the royal pyramids and tombs, and for the artistic work of the sarcophagi and columns. They resorted to the southern region to hew out the hard granite from the Red Mountain behind the city of Aswan, and constructed rafts for the conveyance of the vast masses of stone to the lower country in the favorable season of the inundation. The dreaded band of taskmasters was set over the wretched people, who were urged to speedy work, more by the punishment of the stick than by words of warning. The inhabitants of the country in the extensive environs of the town or in the villages of the open plain were kept in order by governors of nomes. The judges enforced strict obedience to the written law and administered justice to the oppressed, whose complaints it was the duty of the king's deputies to hear. The warlike host of young soldiers, Mesha, consisting of infantry, whom the master of the armory equipped with clubs and axes, spears and bows and arrows, were commanded by experienced generals. It was the duty of the commander-in-chief to plan the campaign, dispose the troops, and go out to war with his soldiers. Of a more peaceful kind was the celebrated office of the teachers of mysteries, Herr Sheshta, for they were the possessors of all hidden wisdom in those ancient times. The mystery teachers of heaven looked upwards, and as wise astronomers explained the ever-changing course of the stars, the mystery teachers of all lands contemplated the nature of earthly things and appear to have been the geographers of the ancient world, the mystery teachers of the depth. If we are not mistaken, were the possessors of knowledge of that which the earth conceals in its depths, and were initiated in the peculiar nature of the soil. Others, mystery teachers of the secret word, wrote books on subjects of deep thought, whilst the mystery teachers of the sacred language devoted themselves to the special knowledge of the Egyptian tongue. Most frequently of all, we met with the mystery teachers of Pharaoh are of the commands of Pharaoh, wise men who held the position of private secretaries to their master. Next to them, we read of mystery teachers who examined words, without doubt, either learned men of letters or judges who listened to complaints and compared the evidence of the witnesses. The scribes were divided into many branches according to their positions and businesses. In obedience to the commands of their master, they either wrote the events of his domestic life or accurately recorded his income and expenditure and kept his books in good order. For a scribe of talent, the way was open to the highest honors. The mass of servants and skilled workmen were also divided into fixed orders and gradations. In this way, the welfare of the court and country was secured by the adjustment of the individual members. Everyone maintained his place according to his own worth, and the machinery of the state ran in the regular course, being set in motion by the all-powerful will of Pharaoh, or as he proclaimed for himself, right? Blind obedience was the oil which caused the harmonious working of the whole. And this great world, buried in its deep desert grave for more than 6,000 years, is now beginning to wake up out of its long sleep, like the briar rose in the legend, and to relate in childishly simple language its long past history in home and state. To return to King Mena, after conducting a campaign against the Libyans, he was seized and devoured by a crocodile, such as the story of the ancients was Set, the lord of the horrid water monsters, embittered with the envious hatred against the founder of the most ancient state. The names alone of the successors of the first pharaohs are preserved in the tablets of Saqqara and Abydos and harmonized to some extent with the Turin papyrus, which, when completed, contained the names of the same kings together with the length of their reigns in a similar order. From a merely superficial examination, it is clear that, with the exception of 2 or 3 names towards the end of the Third Dynasty, they are radically different from those of the pharaohs who succeeded them. For the most part, the older ones suggest the ideas of strength and terror. Thus, Mena is the constant, Teta, the smiter, Ka, the bull of bulls, Senta, the terrible, Huni, the hewer. It is not until the 22nd name on the monumental list that the entities Yemen, Sabak, Jahota become incorporated into the royal cartouche, while from henceforth the sign of whom was treated like a god king, Ra, is paraded in a suitable place of honor in the upper space. Among the rulers of the most ancient kingdom, Ka Sakari, perfect through Sakari, is only one whose name plainly preserves. It's the only one whose name plainly preserves the remembrance of an entity that's considered to be a deity. But then the question naturally arises: how is it that a king of Tene, the capital of Upper Egypt, gave himself a name which, by the presence of Vine Sakari at Mennefer, Memphis, suggests the capital of Lower Egypt? However this may be, One thing is certain, that Mena laid the foundation of this future metropolis, and that the descendants of his house held their court Ben Defer, not at Tini. Unfortunately, the monuments are silent until the time of Snefru, and our information concerning the most ancient rulers of Egypt comes only from the fragments of Manetho and from Greek stories of doubtful veracity. And it looks like the text was abbreviated here, but as we've seen before, some of his theories, he doesn't, he didn't think that they were sound anymore. So Mena's son and successor, Teta, built the royal palace in Memphis and wrote wonderful, as it may sound, a work on anatomy, for he was a physician. The monuments are silent concerning this physician king, but a papyrus roll of the most remote age, bought in Thebes by Epers, tells in an archaic language that when King Teta sat on the throne, a prescription for making the hair grow was much commended. More important than this information is the testimony that the writings of the pharaohs on medical subjects reach back as far as the first dynasty. 2. Mention one only. The long medical papyrus found in the necropolis of Memphis and now in the Berlin Museum contains prescriptions for the cure of malignant leprosy and many other kinds of illness, treats of the fractures, and teaches, although in a simple childish way, of the construction and mechanisms of the body. Though composed in the reign of Ramses II, there is a passage in it which throws back the origin of one part of the work to the fifth king of the tablet of Abydos. It runs thus. Oh, there's a footnote. Did I skip it? Where's the footnote? The Sapti thing. But this is the beginning of the sum of all the methods for the cure of bad leprosy. It was discovered in a writing of very ancient origin, in a writing case underneath the feet of the divine Anpu in the town of Saksum at the time when the deceased Sapti was king. After his death, the writing was brought to the sanctuary of the blessed king Senta on account of its miraculous power of healing. When Pes, or Atta, ascended the throne, the land of Egypt suffered from a great famine. In spite of it, the people were employed in building pyramids on the site called Ka'akam, Black Bull, where the bodies of the sacred Apis bulls reposed in the Serapeum in the desert. The place is near the modern village of Saqqara, and it is probable that the building with steps called the Pyramid of Degrees, whose hollow chamber contained the bones of bulls and inscriptions relating to the royal names of Apis, was a common sepulchre consecrated by Atta to this animal. This pyramid, unlike all others, does not face the points of the compass. It is oblong, not square, and instead of containing one chamber, it has many of unique form in the interior. These were explored in 1821 by Minutali, an Italian officer, and in one of them he found a skull and the soles of feet, both of which were carefully gilded. 2 of the chambers were inlaid with a kind of mosaic consisting of green fianza and stucco. When Smanpta inherited the crown, a great number of miracles were displayed, and a violent plague raged in the country. When Ba-Natur ascended the throne, the earth opened at Bubastis and swallowed up many people. When Cacao, bull of bulls, succeeded to the kingdom of the worship of Apis was instituted in the city of Memphis, and that of Menevis at On. A sanctuary and priesthood were founded to the honor of the sacred ram Mendes at the town of that name. Pure men served the sacred episcopal, whose death was deeply lamented. His body, adorned with decorations, was exposed on a high bier, and even his name, Happy, was borne as an honor by many distinguished persons. With regard to the laws of the kingdom, Ba Nutcher, who had apparently no sons, enacted as a standing rule forever that women should inherit the throne. The working of this new custom had important consequences in the establishment of many a dynasty, either when the queen, after the death of her husband, took the reins of government, or stepped into the place of her youthful son, or when the daughter and heiress of a deceased pharaoh, who had no sons, gave her hand to a foreign husband. According to the ancient custom, the mother's pedigree had great weight in the order of inheritance because it gave an unconditional claim of right to the son as the true heir of the father of his mother. The husband of a royal heiress appeared as king in name only, but it devolved on the son of such a marriage to maintain his full right to the throne and scepter by virtue of his maternal descent. If Pharaoh married the daughter of a noble family, not of royal race, the offspring of the union, as appears from many occurrences in the history of the kingdom, had not equal rights with the true royal children. The father of the new pharaoh was honored by the title of the father of the divine one, Atef Netcher. Wow. Is it Itef Netcher? The mother was called Mother of the King, Mutsatan. In the majority of the cases, the succession of the dynasties was determined by the union of new suitors with heiresses of blood royal. Whether the chosen husbands could trace their pedigree back to royal ancestors or not, under the rule of Eper Ka Ra, tradition relates the waters of the Nile suddenly assumed for 11 days the taste of honey. We know nothing of Seker but the strange tradition which says he was 5 cubits in height and 3 in breadth. Yeah. Well, the 3 in the 4.5 feet wide, 7.5 feet tall, thereabouts, is someone from the south, probably, right? Under Netcher Rups, or Netcher Rups, first king of the 3rd dynasty, the tribes of Libya revolted against their Egyptian masters, and Pharaoh only succeeded in subduing them when, by the help of whom he considers to be gods, the moon appeared to grow of a gigantic size, which threw terror into the ranks of the enemy. The heir of this king, Thros, was skilled in the art of healing sickness and injuries to the body. On account of this wisdom, the title of God of Healing was given to him. He was diligent in other matters and was skilled in the art of erecting solid masses of building in well-hewn stone. Also, he gave instruction in the painting of the written characters for the benefit of people expert in writing. The first of the monumental kings was Senefer Pharaoh, he who makes good, which, let's see if I can, see. Senefer Pharaoh. A number of stones carved during his lifetime mention him. With Snefru first appears the custom of adding to the king's own name another and sacred one besides 3 high-sounding titles, without distinguishing the individual. The first title was that of her, who dispenses life and prosperity. Second, Lord of the double diadem. And the third, the image of the golden her, conqueror of his opponent. Now, her is, they draw a little face, and that's basically the meaning. Like on my Ekankar playlist, Mr. Harold Klemp talks about how he's, you know, putting a face on God, that sort of thing. That's the sort of thing these rulers are claiming for themselves when they take on that name. But Bhagavan kind of relates to that name, her, doesn't it? Sort of the persona of God. It doesn't mean that God's incarnate to the physical world or anything like that necessarily. Conqueror of his opponent. After each king's name was placed that of his pyramid, to distinguish him and as a pledge of lasting fame. It was a pious custom whenever the king or a great noble was mentioned to add immediately after his name, life, health, and strength be to him. On the steep wall of rock in the Wadi Magara, where in the very ancient caverns the traces of the miner may easily be recognized, Sneferu appears as a warrior with a mighty club, striking a vanquished enemy to the ground. The inscription engraved beside the picture mentions him clearly by name, with the title of Vanquisher of a Foreign People. The land which formerly yielded copper ore and blue and green precious stones seems to have been a possession much coveted by the rulers of Kemet. So Kemet is the red land, the art is the black land, right? And it was without doubt Snefer who, I should, Snuffer Fru, okay, who gained possession of this monumentous mountainous peninsula by a short sea passage from Egypt or by a longer journey on the backs of donkeys. The soldiers of the king and the troops of miners, with the steward and overseer, reached the valley of the mines. Even at this day, the traveler can see and read on the half-defaced stone a number of pictures and writings. Standing on a high rock which commands the entrance to the Wadi Magara, his eye discovers without difficulty the ruins of the strong fortress whose well-built walls once enclosed huts beside a deep well and protected the Egyptian troops from sudden attack. There were also temples there dedicated to Hathor, whom the Egyptians worshipped as the protectress of the land of Mafkat in the Sinaitic Peninsula, the Sinaitic Peninsula, under the Sparrow Hawk of Sot, Lord of the East. The princes of the 4th and 5th dynasties maintained with a powerful hand the inheritance that Sneferu had left them. The mines were permanently worked, the enemy conquered, and the entities considered to be gods worshipped. Sneferu bethought himself in good time of the end of his life and of a worthy monument, the royal edifice of the pyramid that stands near my doom contained, we doubt not, his body. The name of the building is the good Egyptian Ka, a word which served to denote sometimes the rising of the sun, which the festival, sometimes the crown. Is it Ka? Here it was, in close proximity to the pyramid. That some natives discovered the entrance to some tombs of ancient time and brought to light, amongst other things, two statues remarkable for their antiquity and their admirable art. They are portrait statues of a man and his wife sitting side by side in a dignified attitude on a die-shaped seat. The man, who was called Rahotep, was the son of a king and had filled many important offices during his life. He led the warriors in the service of the monarch, and on the town of Ra, he bore the sacred office of chief priest. His wife, Nefert, the beautiful or the good, was the granddaughter of a king who is not named. An old papyrus obtained by De Presse in Thebes speaks of Snefru, Sneferfru. Then died the holiness of King Huni. Then was raised up the holiness of King Sneferfru as a good king over the whole country. Then was Kekim appointed governor of the city. Dynasty 4. To restore as completely as possible the names and order of the pharaohs of the 4th and 5th dynasties, the tablets of Abydos and Saqqara and the Turin papyrus may together be considered as approximating to the truth. According to the testimony of the tablets of the successor of the good king Sneferfru was Xufu, the Cheops of Herodotus. With him begin the memorable traditions of Egyptian history as recorded by the Greek and Roman authors. So, Xufu. Okay, that is right there. But now we find that there's a whole series of cartouches in the Great Pyramid. Like 5 pharaohs are mentioned there, and there's evidence of like a mark in 7,000 years, and there's like another part that's like probably older than that. I mean that's yeah. There's some older stuff about the pyramids, and some of these names. I mean, at least one of the names is older than Khufu. But no one who has once set foot on the black soil of Egypt ever turns on his homeward journey till his eyes have looked upon that wonder of antiquity, the threefold mass of the pyramids on the edge of the desert, which is reached after an hour's ride over the long causeway from the village of Giza on the bank, on the left bank of the Nile. From the far distance are clearly seen their giant forms, looking as if they were mountains. Yet they are but tombs built by the hands of men, and which raised by Khufu and 2 other kings of the same family and dynasty have been the admiration and astonishment alike of the ancient and modern world, perfectly adjusted to the cardinal points of the horizon. They differ from each other both in breadth and height, as shown by the measurements of Colonel Howard Weiss. The Pyramid of Khufu, 450 to 475 feet high and 746 feet breadth. The Pyramid of Khafra, 447 to 500 feet. Height, 690 to 750 feet. The Pyramid of Menkaura, 203 feet high, 352 to 387 feet breadth. Height is the word they're using, so yeah. The mode of construct of these enormous masses was for long an almost insoluble enigma to even experts in engineering. According to their ancient custom, the Egyptians, while they lived in health and vigor, were ever mindful to turn their looks westward to where the door of the grave would one day close on the body, which should rise to a new existence after an appointed number of years, while the soul, though bound to the body, was free to leave and return to the grave each day. In such a belief, it was their custom betimes to dig their graves in the form of a deep shaft in the rock, and as a superstructure to this eternal dwelling, to raise sometimes only a hall, sometimes several apartments, and to adorn these richly with colored writing and painted sculptures, as if it were meant for a house of pleasure and joy. Not seldom did death snatch away the builder before his work was finished. In such a case, the visitor finds pictures in which the draughtsman's skillful hand had sketched an outline with a red crayon on the polished surface of the stone wall, but time had not been left for the painter to fill in the picture with bright and varied colors. The pharaoh, therefore, as soon as he mounted the throne, immediately began building his tomb. The kernel of the future edifice was raised on the limestone soil of the desert in the form of a small pyramid built in steps, of which the carefully constructed and well-finished interior formed the king's eternal dwelling. A covering was added to the outside of the kernel, followed by a second and sometimes even a third and fourth, and when at last it became almost impossible to extend the area of the pyramid farther, a casing of hard stone polished like glass and fitted accurately to the angles of the steps completely covered the gigantic building. A special name was assigned to each pyramid to distinguish it from its neighbors. Thus, the sepulchral monument of Khufu bore the title of Skut. The lights, the stones for the building of it, were chosen from 3 different places. The inner material, a spongy limestone without consistence, was found close at hand. A better sort of stone, chosen for the steps and the successive layers, was brought from Tura upon rollers along the causeway about half a mile long, which reached from the left bank of the river immediately opposite the mountain to the plateau of the pyramids, while the covering was of costly stone brought down from the river from a great distance. On the southern border of Egypt, close to Aswan, stands the Red Mountain, Tutesheret, composed of a granite sprinkled with black and red, as hard as iron and shining beautifully when polished. The brilliancy and durability of the syenite, well fitted for buildings that were to last forever, made the possession of this stone much desired. Quarry marks of those ancient times are still visible. Here we meet with the outline of a colossal statue, and there the whole length of the fourth side of an obelisk still waits to be loosened from its bed. 10 years passed before the workmen had quarried the stone for the great pyramid, and the mountain of Tura laid the foundation and closed the dark tomb chamber in the rock, and twice 10 years more before the whole work was completed. The few contemporary monuments presented Khufu in a different light from that in which his character is drawn in the time of the Persian and Greek dominion, when his reputation was at low ebb. The rock tablets in the Wadi Maghara extol him as the annihilator of his enemies and represent him as a brave, active ruler. Latter tradition says he was barbarous in manners and of a tyrannical nature, and forced the people to do hard labor. He closed the temples from an evil motive, fearing that prayer and sacrifices would shorten the time of the people for work. And we kind of find nowadays that people actually, if they take breaks, it doesn't interfere and it can actually improve their work, taking a break every couple hours or whatever. But some communities take such long prayers that, three small pyramids facing the east in front of Khufu's gigantic tomb formerly contained the bodies of the king's wife and children. Tatefra followed Khufu in the kingdom. His name occurs in the tablets of Abydos and Saqqara, but further than this, we know nothing of him. Khafra, the Khephren of the Greeks, his pyramid, Berta, the bird thing. Where's the bird thing? Designated by the ancients, the great. Oh, was it Wort? Stands close to that of Xofu. Although the stones say the title of Khafra, his name is nevertheless well preserved by the wonderful workmanship of his statues. It is only a few years ago that close to the Sphinx was discovered that the building is still, which is still a mystery, small passages, then spacious halls, and then again dark side rooms, but with huge, well-cut blocks of hard, variegated stone from Aswan, and of the shining alabaster fitted to a hair's breadth, each alternate cornerstone being clamped into the adjacent wall and perfectly squared, but destitute of any mark or inscription. On the east side, the stone-covered space of ground showed in a long hall the shaft of a well into whose depths a number of statues of Khafra had been thrown. The greater number of them were destroyed by the violence of the fall. Only one seemed to have survived, the figure of King Khafra in a sitting posture of regal appearance, dignified in look and bearing. A sparrow hawk, hiding itself behind the pharaoh's head, spreads out its wings in calm repose as if to protect the royal master. And remember, this is a 1902 book, so I mean, this is a reprint that I'm reading from, but the name and title of the king appear inscribed on the base of the statue. The greenish stone, shining with a high polish, is a hard diorite, a material seldom chosen for the execution of a monument. In saying that the discovery of the statues of Khafra has proved an unparalleled addition to the history of the old empire, and that they must be esteemed the greatest treasure of antiquity, we have not yet nearly exhausted the advantages to be derived from Khafra's stone image, as that wooden statue of old Sheikh al-Balad, so the city, I don't know, which was brought to light of the tombs at Saqqara, as the various colored statues of limestone which came forth from the narrow Serdab, Serdabin, perhaps, the Arabic word for the secret chamber in the sepulchre chapels where the statues of the deceased were placed. Of the tombs as witnesses of ancient life, as every artistic production of those days in picture, writing, or sculpture bears the stamp of the highest perfection of art, so the statue of Khafra also teaches us that in the beginning of history, the works of art already redounded to the praise of their authors. From east to west, almost in the same line with Khafra's pyramid, lies the Colossal Sphinx, the body of a lion united with the face of a man. As if at rest, the lion stretches out its forepaws, between which a narrow path led to the temple which stood at the breast of the monster, while a memorial stone preserves the memory of the gifts made by Drahottemus. I don't know the word for fourth, so fourth, to the entity. The lion was of the living rock, but where the hollows of the stone interrupted the rounding of the body, light masonry was introduced to fill in what was wanting in the form. So far as we learn from an inscription, King Khufu had seen the monster, therefore the statue existed before his time. To the north lay a temple of, the Isis. A second dedication to Yasur was situated on the southern side, and a third was consecrated to the Sphinx. Yasur is Osiris, by the way. In the sacred language, the Sphinx is called Hu, a word that only denotes the man-headed lion, while thought of as a god, the man-lion was called Ramsu, a word meaning horse on the horizon, and which the Greek language translated by Harmachis. Many fragments of antiquity preserved in the cemetery at Memphis inform us that Xaphra's wife was named Mersnanx. She appears to have been a devout worshiper of the entities, and in adoring them, she attained honor for herself. After Xaphra had gone to the land where Isser held the scepter, King Raman Naka the Mycerinus of the Greeks. Is it Mucerinus of the Greeks ascended the throne? His pyramid occupies the southwest corner of the plain of Giza and is called Har or this what's that little Harra, the high one. Yeah, I think that's just the determinative for a pyramid. There's another glyph that I was thinking of. When Colonel Howard Vyse found the well-guarded entrance of the Chamber of the Dead, and let me try to, show you real quick there. It's facsimile edition, so it's not. When Colonel Howard Vyse found the well-guarded entrance of the Chamber of the Dead, and entered the room of eternity, he saw as the last trace of Ra-man burial, the wooden cover of the coffin, and the stone sarcophagus, hewn out of a single block of hard stone and beautifully ornamented outside in the style of a temple, sent to London as a valuable monument of antiquity, ship and cargo sank to the bottom of the sea off Gibraltar. The coffin containing the mummy was saved and is now in the British Museum. The inscription on the cover runs thus: O Osiris, King of the North and the South, Munkau Ra, Ra Man Naka living forever. The heavens have produced thee. Thou wast engendered by Nut. Thou art the offspring, Seb, sky and the earth. Thy mother, Nut, spreads herself over thee in her form as a divine mystery. She has granted thee to be as a god. Thou shalt never more have enemies, O King of the North and South. Ra Man Naka living forever. According to the Greek testimony, Ra Man Naka enjoyed the reputation of being a mild and just man. It also appears certain that he was industriously studied in the religious writing of his age. The ritual of the dead, which was usually buried with every mummy as a guide to in the world beyond, mentions this king thus. This gate was found in the city of Hermopolis, engraved on a block of alabaster and painted in blue color under the feet of this god. It was found in the time of King Ra-man-naka, the deified by the king's son, Hartataf, when he undertook a journey to inspect the temples of Egypt. He brought the stone as a wonderful thing to the king after he had well understood the contents, full of mystery, which were on it. Shepses Koth. So what is this? Shep Sus Koth. Or cock. That doesn't quite look like an F, does it? It kind of looks like, oh, you're seeing that upside down, but that doesn't look like a snake. That looks like the knife. It's the name of the pharaoh who succeeded Ra-men-Naka-e. All doubt on the subject is removed by the inscriptions on a tomb at Saqqara. The nobles for whom it was constructed bore the name of Ptah Shepsus. He lived at a court and was a favorite with the kings. He appears first as an adopted child of Ra-men-Naka-e, for he placed him among the royal children in the royal women's house. When Ra-men-Naka-e died, Shepsus Ka'ak placed the young page in his own house and gave him his daughter in marriage. He was esteemed by the king above all his servants. He became private secretary for every work that Pharaoh was pleased to execute. He charmed the heart of his master. His majesty allowed him to embrace his knees and exempted him from the salutation of the ground. The last words are not without advantage to our knowledge of the ancient usages at the court of the pharaohs. When a servant of high or low degree approached his royal master, custom demanded that he should throw himself repeatedly in the dust and kiss the ground, only favorites being permitted to touch the king's knee. Ptah Shepsus directed the forced labor of the mines, and was also the prophet of Saqqara and chief guardian of his sanctuary. A real prophet isn't just something handed down sort of thing. There's more to actual prophecy, but the highest decoration he bore was that of chief of the priesthood of Memphis. There are but few tombs that give any further tidings of Shepsus Ka'ak. We know that he did not neglect to build himself a pyramid, which gave the name of Ka'bah, the cool, and the plan of the pyramids and the temple at Giza. I'm trying to show the rest of the thing here, but I guess so on the plan we have okay, so that's the rest of it. So if you pause it, you can see some of that. You got the entrance to the Great Pyramid is A. B, the entrance to the second pyramid. C, the long pits, by some supposed to be for mixing the mortar. D, Pyramid of the daughter of Cheops, Herodotus 2, 126. E, pavement of black stones. Basaltic trap, the same is found on the causeways of the pyramids of Saqqara. F, remains of masonry. G, round enclosures of crude brick of Arab date. At northeast angle of this pyramid, tombs of individuals with deep pits. The tomb of numbers, so H, I, K, the two inclined passages meeting underground, apparently once belonging to a small pyramid that stood over them. LL, the rock here is cut to a level surface. M, a narrow and shallow trench cut in the rock. N, a square space cut in the rock, probably to receive and support the cornerstone of the casing of the pyramid. P. Here stood a tomb which received the title of the Temple of Osiris. Q. The tomb of raids to the west tombs. H. Of tombs H. Okay, the tombs of individuals, deep pits. R. A pit cased with stone of modern date. S. The third pyramid. T. 3 small pyramids. UV ruined buildings whose original use is now difficult to determine. WWW. 666 in Hebrew, right? Fragments of stone arranged in the manner of a wall. X. A few palms and sycamores with a well. Y. Southern stone causeway. Z. Northern causeway repaired by the caliphs. Lowercase a, tombs cut in the rock. B, masonry. C, lowercase b, the rest of these are lowercase, by the way. C, black stones. D, tombs cut in the rock. E, the Sphinx. F, pits probably unopened. G, pits. H, stone ruin on a rock. I, doorway or passage through a causeway. K, a grotto in the rock. L, inclined causeway, part of Y. M, N, tombs in the rock. O, some hieroglyphs on the rock. P, tombs cut in the scarp of the rock. Q, stone wall. R, steps cut in the rock near the northwest angle of the Great Pyramid. ST, magnetic south in 1832 and 1836, corresponding to MNTN being true north. And let me show you again what we're looking at. And you can see better high quality pictures and whatnot online. And I will leave you with the ancient Egyptian greeting, Sharma, peace be upon you.